You're listening to the best of the bravest. Interviews with the FDNY's elite. I was talking off air with tonight's guest, and, it's interesting. We were talking about people that needed to be documented in terms of their stories over the years. And it's amazing. A lot of guys think that their stories might not measure up, but I think tonight's guest respectfully is incorrect. I think his story is very much one worth telling. And I wanted to get him on tonight to tell, and I'm glad he's made the time. Because listen, you get guys on from either the police department or the fire department, doesn't matter which one, from a certain era. It's important to document that. And time is only progressing more and more to where stories from not only the 50s, 60s, 70s, but the 80s and even the 90s, it's important to document because, listen, you never know nowadays when someone can leave you at any given time. So tonight's show is very much important to me, and I know to you guys in the audience. For that reason, I welcome you to it. It's episode 319 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. It's going to be volume 59 of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's lead. I got Greg Pitcher in the chat already, John Costello, Steve Iarato, Garrett Lindgren, formerly of Rescue 3, Scotty, who's always here as well. And that's not Scott Wagner, but the other Scott, whose last name is not known, retired NYPD detective, as well as former New York City transit cop. And anybody else tuning in via LinkedIn and Twitter tonight. There's a super chat as always. I won't waste too much time. We're going to run the sponsors very quickly so I don't keep my guests in the back too long. But just as always, there is a super chat. And if you want to contribute there, by all means, fire away. And if the question is relevant to the conversation, I'll make sure I highlight it rather at the appropriate time. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. And let's roll the sponsors. The first one, of course, by now is my consulting company. Need advice on how to start your podcast? Frustrated with the editing process? Can't find a voiceover guide? Hi, I'm Mike Colón, and I'm here to help. I'm the owner and founder of MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company for all things media, where I can offer you consulting advice on how to get started, and once you get started, editing, as well as voiceover work, all for a very reasonable price. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at 917-781-6189 or the email that you see listed here. I'm always available, and I'm always willing to help. Again, 917-781-6189. Why go to some giant consulting firm that's going to charge you an arm and a leg when you can just come to me? If you want to be stress-free, the way to go is to call MC. MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company. Admittedly, I've been working on having more of a presence on social media. It's kind of difficult when you're working a day job and doing a bunch of other things to market your business. But nevertheless, I market it twice a week on this podcast. So if you really want to partner up with me, depending on whatever the media endeavor is, let's do so, and let's make that happen. And the next one, of course, I hope you don't need a PI, but listen, different things happen, and unfortunately, sometimes it may require one. So if you need one, and you're in the New York City area, there's nobody better, and I'm not just saying this because he's my friend, I mean it, there's no one better to go to than Billy Ryan. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast. And an additional hellos in the chat to Carl Gearhart. And I mentioned, let's see here, who else do we have? Joe Maliga and Chris Ebden, who'll be on the show in 9 days. May 10th, he's due to appear. And Scott mentions there's currently a fifth alarm going on in Brooklyn, specifically Bushwick. So to all the members responding to that, please stay safe and watch yourselves and watch those along with you in the cruise. Hopefully no maydays come out of that. Again, fifth alarm at Cooper and Bushwick on the east side of the street, according to Scott, who must be buffing the scanner tonight. And my next guest went to his fair share of fifth alarms in his career because for 35 years, he was on the front lines with the FDNY. He was no stranger to danger. His commands were always quite busy. And he saw multiple different eras. He came on the 60s, 1966 to be specific. So think about it, the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, and a little bit of the 2000s. He retired in 2001. As a deputy chief. And by the way, hi to Patrick Hetzel as well, who's tuning in tonight. That's the other person I forgot. And since then, he still is heavily involved in the fire service. He's currently the president of the Lieutenant Joseph DiBernardo Foundation, and that was started in memory of Joseph DiBernardo, of course, who was a lieutenant who suffered tragic injuries at the Black Sunday fire of 2005. He was assigned to Rescue 3 at the time. He fought valiantly for 6 years before succumbing to those injuries. And tonight's guest carries on the memory of his son. And this is somebody I've wanted for a while. I'm glad he's here. So without further ado, for this volume 59 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite is retired FDNY Deputy Chief Joe DiBernardo. And Chief, like I said, it's a pleasure to have you. And I'm glad you're here to share your story.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's an honor to be here on your program. You've had some really great, legendary people. And like I said, I don't know, hope I can measure up to some of your prior guests. And thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Oh, no problem. It's an honor for us, like I said, myself and the audience as a collective to have you here. And your story is definitely one worth chronicling. And so we'll chronicle it tonight. And we'll begin with where you grew up. And you can transition this into your time in the military in Vietnam. But tell me about first where you grew up and the gradual process of getting into civil service and ultimately, firstly, getting into the military.
Okay. I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up living with my grandparents in their grandparents' home in Brooklyn, and then we moved to Richmond Hill, Queens. My grandfather bought a house, and I was on the second floor with my two aunts, my mother, my father, my sister, and I slept on the couch, the living room couch. It was great though, because the whole family was there. And I grew up, my father was in World War II in the Navy. And when he got out of the Navy, he worked in the Navy Yard. And it was really, we grew up, I guess we were lower middle class, but it was great having family around. I had aunts, uncles, everybody, when they got married, they lived within the block or two around the neighborhood. In those days, all the families all lived together in the city. So I really loved it growing up. I remember my father bought a house in 1951. It was literally on the other side of the tracks, because down the block from me was the Long Island Railroad, and the locomotives used to pull in and fill up the tender with coal. We had the coal feeder on there, and the bells were ringing, and they were chugging away. And I said, "Oh my God, how am I ever going to sleep? So noisy." And it was so dirty, sooty from the locomotives. The park that we played in on the corner was called Smoky Park, because it was always smoke. The ladies couldn't hang out their laundry because of all the smoke from the locomotives. And when you slid into second base, you come up full of soot. So, but I grew up in the park with all my local friends, and it was just a great place to grow up. We hung out in the candy store, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful era. My mother and father grew up during the Depression. So I remember her always telling me, she was always pushing me into civil service. Become a cop, become a fireman. I said, "Ma, I don't want to become a cop or fireman." She said, "Look, just take the test, because, during the Depression, they're the only people that were working in the neighborhood. People were doing work. My parents were working in factories, making slippers and things like that. But the cops and the firemen were the only ones working." So I didn't even know any firemen. I took the test for the fire department in 1962. I was never even in a firehouse. So as I was strolling along in life with no real goal or object, I was, banging around doing different work. Worked in construction, worked in retail. I did take the test, and I never gave it. I didn't take the police test. I just took the fire test. And banged around a lot. Loved the neighborhood I grew up in. I'm still friends with people from back in those days, and I just was lucky to grow up in a neighborhood where you could walk to the park, where you could walk to the ice cream parlor or the candy store, and all your friends played ball, stickball, football, everything. It was great. Unfortunately, today everybody moved to the suburbs, and they have to be driven everywhere. There's no places for the kids to hang out. But my childhood was great. I just must say it was really great.
No, and it paints an elaborate picture of an era gone by, because you think
Yeah.
about it now, and I think that's unfortunately why a lot of kids, and it's part of the reason, not the main reason why, a lot of kids get in trouble now that live in the city, because there's no, as you said, not too many places for them to, healthy places, that is, for them to let out that energy. And so they look for other ways. Sometimes those ways are okay. Sometimes those ways aren't, and they get into trouble much sooner than they should be. They should never get into trouble, granted, but they're into things at an early age they shouldn't be because of that reason.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I mean, unfortunately, I worked in a lot of the poorer areas of the cities, and the kids have really no place to play.
Yeah.
Because I'll never forget one of the civilian employees I had. She lived in the projects. She had 3 kids, and I said, where do your kids play? Do they go out and play? She said, no, they can't go out. I said, why not? She said, the gangs control the courtyard. That's their turf. So she says, my kids can't go out and play. They can't even leave their apartment. What a way to grow up. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Luckily, there are some youth clubs, boxing clubs, and basketball clubs on the old area, that the kids can really get out and do something good and decent. But most of the inner city parts of New York City, anyway, I don't know how it is in the rest of the country, but the inner city, the kids really it's a hard life. It really is a hard life. And unfortunately, the gangs control not only the courtyard, but they control the stairwells too in
Yeah.
the project. It's
Yeah.
terrible.
No, you're not wrong, and you would know. You saw it firsthand, even in the good times. Even when crime started to go down in the city in the
Oh, yes.
90s, there were still parts of the city that still had that
Yes.
problem, and still do to this day.
Yes.
The city in the 60s, and really America in the 60s, saw this dramatic shift where we had the Depression, then we had what's often referred to as the Greatest Generation. There was the prosperity post World War II of, just the general, if you will, American dream. And then comes Vietnam in the early
Yeah.
1960s, which
Yeah.
saw two philosophies. One, of course, in terms of standing up for the country, that some had, and the others very much anti-war, protesting the war and policies that led up to it. So it created something that lasted well into the 70s in terms of that conflict and vision, and essentially a generational gap. So for you at that time, I don't know if I imagine that, well, the draft was still in place. Were you drafted into the
Yes.
military, or did you sign up?
No, I was eventually Uncle Sam called and sent me a token. Used to get a token to go down to report to Whitehall Street. They put you on a bus. I was drafted. I know eventually it would come. As a matter of fact, when I was looking for employment, the first question they asked you is, have you been in the service? Because everybody got drafted. And when they found out you hadn't been in the service yet, they said, come back and see me after you've been in the service. So I knew it was going to come eventually. And I didn't, eventually they called me. I got drafted. I went down, did my basic at Fort Dix, and then I did my advanced infantry training out in Fort Lewis, Washington. I was assigned to the 10th Cavalry 4th Division out there, and I was out there for a while, and I've even heard of Vietnam. Couldn't find it on a map if you told me.
Hmm.
And then my mother got ill, so I got a compassionate reassignment to the 5th Infantry Division on the East Coast up in Massachusetts. And I was I'll never forget, I was in the headquarters platoon and the recon platoon, headquarters company and the recon platoon. And one day we got a delivery, these big boxes about yell big, and we're looking at it. It was a topographical map. And I said, what's all those little 3 things sticking up? And what they were was symbols for rice paddies. I said, I wonder where this is. So the battalion I was assigned to was gearing up for Vietnam. It was top secret. It was 1965. And they're gearing up to go to Vietnam. Now, I had been transferred to the 5th Division because my mother was ill. I was on compassionate reassignment. And I had less than a year to go when they were being reflagged to the 1st Infantry Division, which was going to be the first division in the country. The Marines got there in March up at Da Nang to protect the airstrip, and the 173rd got there in like June or July, and then we were the first full division to go. Now, I didn't have to go, but I said, look, I've been playing soldier for over a year now. I wonder if I can do it. I wonder if I can really be what I trained for, I wonder, I guess, can I find out what I'm made of? So I said that I wanted to go, so I volunteered to go, and I wound up with the big red one over there. And basically, we were the first 100,000 troops in country. I lived in the jungle. It was, it was totally horrible. But you really get to find out what you're made of when the shooting starts, and it's amazing. I find it amazing. The big, tall, tough guys would hide, and the little guys that were very quiet stood up and did their job. And you really get to find, you know what the word fear is. That's what fear is. When you feel empty, your throat is parched, and you're scared out of your wits, but you still do your job. It's quite interesting when you're getting shot at or mortared, how people react in different ways, and you really get to find out what you're made of. And it was very interesting being in combat. I made this expression about fear and courage, and some people were very courageous and other people were cowardly. But what is defined as courage for me is the ability to do your job while consumed with fear. So you're consumed with fear, but you're still able to do your job. That's what courage is. Because a lot of people cannot function when they're so afraid, and they just curl up and do it. But courage is the ability to do your job while you're consumed with fear. And I took that into civilian life after the Army, into the fire service. And another thing I learned there, you can have the best battle plan in the world. It's called an op order. You have an operational order, and you plan out all the scenarios. But once the first shot is fired, throw everything out the window. Nothing works like you planned it.
Right.
So, yeah. So I came home from Vietnam, and I went directly into the fire department. They had called me January '65, but I was in the service. So as soon as I got out, I got on the job. But my class was made up of mostly veterans. It was a small class of like 50, 60 guys, and most of us were veterans. And it was, probably school was interesting. We're all veterans. We're all men now, and there was no yelling and screaming. None of this like DI like they have today. And yes, sir, no, sir. Well, none of that crap. Oh, excuse me.
No, say a bad word.
None of that. It was just learn and teach us, learn, and do this and do that. And I love the single slide evolution. When we went up, I went to Proby School on Roosevelt Island. It was called Welfare Island then. And I loved doing the 5-story single slide off the roof. And myself and my partner was Larry Fitzpatrick. You know the name? You know the name, right? Yeah. It's ironic. That's how he died, doing this sliding off the roof and the rope broke. But Larry and I would, when we're getting there a couple of weeks out from graduation, we'd do about 10 a day, and we had fun doing that. That's some great guys in my class. And they, I remember that I wasn't the handiest guy in the world with tools or anything. I couldn't make knots too good. And I remember this one instructor said, "DiBernardo, you're not gonna go anywhere. You can't even tie freaking knots." I said, "Yes, sir, Lieutenant, but I try. I'm not too handy. I admit it. You're not going anywhere." Well, I was the only guy in my class to make staff chief, and I was the first guy in my class to make battalion chief, and the only guy to make staff chief in my class. But this guy swore, he said, "Yeah, you'll never amount to anything. You can't even tie a knot." I guess I proved him wrong. We had a lot of great stars in my class, though, really legendary firefighters like Tom Kennedy and Joe Ebert and guys like that. They were just amazing firefighters. Great times, great memories of Proby School.
Before you continue, there is a few people in the chat. Actually, one that wanted you to talk about Tom Kennedy, who you really it segued perfectly into that, because right as you were talking about your academy classes, when CFD 335346 says, Mike, can you have him speak about Tom Kennedy, a legendary firefighter in the FDNY? So for those not familiar with him, Chief, by all means, feel free to paint.
Yeah, Tom was he was in the Army also. He was with the 82nd Airborne.
Oh, wow.
And he was a stationary engineer when he came on. Very tall, good looking. He was the famous. Jill Friedman took a picture of him in her book, and he was in Firehouse magazine of the fireman with the dirty face, 31 truck front piece, and it said, "So this is what you want to be when you grow up." Very famous photograph. That's Tom Kennedy. Well, Tom got appointed to 48 truck in Hunts Point, and then he did a stint in. He was very young. They took a, he did a stint in Rescue 3. From Rescue 3, then he went back to 31 truck in I think it was around 1968, 9, something like that. So he went through all the war years. And then when he got promoted to lieutenant, he went to 26 truck in Harlem as a lieutenant. When he made captain, he went to 56 truck in the South Bronx as the captain. Then he makes battalion chief. He goes back across the river to Harlem in the 16th Battalion, which was a working battalion, really working. And then when he makes deputy, he comes to the 6th Division in the South Bronx. So he spent his entire career in the busiest companies. And in every rank, he worked in the busiest companies. And he was an irons man. He always loved to carry the irons, forcible entry. And he's probably been to more flyers than anybody I know. And he put he got out in 01 like I did. And where does he got hurt as a deputy? All those years as a fireman and a lieutenant and a captain and a battalion chief in the busiest places in the world. He comes up to the 6th Division as a deputy and the ceiling comes down on him. So he had to get out. But Tom Kennedy, total legend. And that's a guy you should have on. He's so dedicated to the fire service. He's amazing. He was involved in writing bulletins and trying to get New York State to make a task force up in case you had another trade center thing where they can get help in from out of town. And just very bright, very great guy.
In the early stages of your career, we're talking with Deputy Chief Joe DiBernardo. This is volume 59 of The Best, the Bravest. Those first 9 years, you're really coming into it during the heart of the war years. Now, when you're in it, it's easier to look back on it and say, wow, that was some time. But when you're in it, you're just doing your job. You're going about it. You're getting a lot of runs, but you're not really thinking about the volume. So amongst the different places that you worked in were 39 engine, 36 engine, and 16 truck. So going through each house, if you had to sum up the biggest lessons you learned there and the fires or other emergencies that stick out, how would you look back on those first 9 years alone and all the learning lessons that came with it?
Well, all different parts of the city, they're all different little fire departments in their own respect. Like 39 didn't do the fire duty of 36, but when 39 had a lot of high-rise fireproof work, which is very difficult fire, very difficult fire. I mean, you can't get out of the hallway without a mask. You can't find the apartment. It's just terrible. And back in those days, that we had the tenements, but the tenements had the old glass that used to fail during a fire, and it had the straw mattress and not the foam mattress. So you could go in without a mask, and you could take the glass. You could get down on the floor and breathe. You didn't need a mask. But it was two different jobs, very difficult. You went to a lot of fires in this area, but over the years, those places got the double pane windows that you couldn't, you can't take out, that don't fail. Everything's foam, everything's plastic, and the contents of the apartments got synthetic. So it was killing guys. You couldn't even take a breath. Your throat would close. So in the beginning, tenements, tenement fires, piece of cake. If you turned the corner and was out the windows, it was good. because then you just had to walk in and put the fire on a piece of cake. Today's firemen, you turn a corner, it's not out the windows usually, because they're so contained by this, and they have these everything in the apartment's plastic or foam rubber, or it's horrible today. And there were all these carcinogens. And also another thing today makes it so much harder. They're all wearing bunker gear and wearing masks. And that's a lot. I see guys in this FDNY on the roof, bunker gear and masks. I don't know how they operate with that. It's very difficult and debilitating for them. A lot of times we didn't wear masks, and actually it was stupid when I look back on it. How many of my friends have died of cancer? Forget it. Because it was a macho thing, especially when you're first promoted and you're a recovering lieutenant. You got to prove to the guys that you're as tough as them. You can go as far in as them. You could take as much of a feed as them. And I got many a carbon monoxide headache after that, but you had to prove yourself at every fire. And in those days, they didn't have the mentality to wear a mask. And I think it's one of the best things the job ever did, is make it mask mandatory. It's saving lives.
It definitely is.
We didn't, you were as only good as your last fire. You could put out 100 fires, and then you screw one up. That's the only thing they remember you of. The one fire you screwed up. Especially as a new officer, you're working with people you don't know. They don't know you. The first time when you go to a fire, you got to go in deeper than them, quicker than them. You have to be better than them, because if you're not, then you're only as good as your last fire.
Yeah, I mean, you could have, what's the old saying? You could have 99 attaboys. I'm going to clean it up a little bit for the show. 99 attaboys,
I know.
One all crap, and that's really it. Because
it really is.
Firefighting, I've learned from being around it, is very much, and I don't say this as a knock. It's not. It's the testament to the high standard that's involved in doing it, no matter where you do it, at what city or what town or even what country. It's a very much what have you done for me lately profession.
Mm.
And like you said, you could have had a 2-alarm blaze that you controlled perfectly, either as the nozzle man or as the incident commander, as the vent man. But then comes that next one. Okay, great. You did good there. Now we got a 3-alarm, and it's in a tenement, or you got another 2-alarm, but this time it's in a cock loft. What are you going to do here? And I'll never forget Bob Gallione when he was on this show a while ago, telling me about how, and he said the same thing. I'm getting salty too. You could have had a fire back then at 6 o'clock where you had that crap moment, a moment you botched, a moment you wish you could take back. But by 8:30, you had another job, and with a mistake you made 2 hours before, you corrected it all on the same tour. And you got me thinking when you were mentioning the evolution of the job, fire duty. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. Listen, it's not good when people's houses or businesses go up in smoke, quite literally, no pun intended. But fire duty in New York City, across the country, at least, I'm not sure how it is in other parts of the world, has gone down where, let's say you have a box, Chief, and there's something you wish you could have done differently at that box, and maybe months before you get an opportunity to correct it.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was lucky to be, 39 and 16, that didn't do a lot of work, but it was very difficult work. 36 was a Harlem company. It was, and I was up there, was tenements, piece of cake to me. I mean, I went back to 16 truck because at that point I wanted to go into education and coaching. So I was taking courses at Hunter College, which is around the corner from 16 truck. So I went back to 16 truck, and but there was night and day that the companies, the ghetto, not the local neighborhood companies versus the Upper East Side companies. But I had a lot of great fires down there, and made some lifelong friends. And then I was involved in the lieutenant's test. I wrote like I studied like I studied in school, which was the night before the test, which is not how you study for civil service. Civil service, you read everything, and you read it once a month, and then the next month you read it again, and you read it again, and you read it again. I didn't do it that way. I just went to, used to be called Delahanty's. It was a civil service school, and they would give me the homework. I would do the homework, and then I wouldn't do anything for the rest of the week. But I was lucky enough to pass the test. The lieutenant's test that I took, I believe it was the 71 lieutenant's test, was screwed up because they didn't have enough exam booklets. So they wound up giving a second test. So I was like 400 on the list. And they gave a lot of guys the second test. A lot of guys worked overtime, decided to take the test. So they marked the second test on a curve. Everybody got like something like 13 points. So they went from like an 800-man list to a 1,600-man list. And I went from 400 to 600. And, guys who didn't want to take the test got promoted and were in the top 100. It was a total cluster bomb. So anyway, I got promoted, and I was very lucky because I went up to the 3rd Battalion in the South Bronx. And I got to work with the busiest companies in the city. That's at the height. I'll tell you, 1976, I'm still covering. I believe we had 150,000 structural fires that year. 150,000 structural fires. Think about that. The entire South Bronx, and you've seen photographs of it during the war years, it would look like Berlin. It was like, holy mackerel. The guys up there were doing tremendous amount of work, tremendous. They were the best, in Brooklyn, parts of Brooklyn, Lower Manhattan. It was like a war. They call it the war years, but nobody that was in at that time ever used that expression. It was just busy. But I was lucky. I went to these busy places, and I had, like I said, I just was with the best firemen there were, and I just, observed, kept my mouth shut, and when I had to speak, I spoke and tried to get through the tour, being as tough as they were, and great experiences. I was lucky enough to do a medical leave in 82 engine in 1976. I was UFO there for a while. I made some friends for life there. The legendary Bob Farrell, Captain Bob Farrell. They called him God with a little G. The guy was unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable. And he's one of the nicest, greatest men I've ever met in my life. And I met so many men up there that were just legendary guys. And not only were they legendary firefighters, but they're legendary men. Bob Farrell is one of the most philanthropic men I know in my life. He went on to become a successful fire tool maker. And he makes great tools, and he donates so much money to charity. It's unbelievable. He actually wrote a book, Bob Farrell, about his war years.
Yes.
And 50% of the proceeds goes to my foundation, and the other 50% go to the Honor Legion. Here's a guy, he doesn't make a dime off it. He gives us everything. He's just he's a wonderful man. He's a great man. And I made other friends from 82 and 39, Tom Simmons, Richie DeSimone. I just had lunch with Eddie Penna today. If the famous Jill Friedman photograph of the fireman coming up with the line up the stairs with an 82, that's Eddie Penna. And he's also on the back cover of one of her books. So I was with him for lunch. What a great man he is. And just all those guys, they were great guys to work with. And of course, Tom Kennedy was up there when I was up there. Really great people. I was lucky. I really learned a lot up there. Even you had to know somebody to get one of those spots too. And I didn't know anybody. So I never got 82. A guy named Mike Hudnett got 82 because his uncle was a staff chief when it opened up. So I went up to a 38 engine up further up. Didn't do that much work compared to 82 but I had a great time there. A great time. Great bunch of guys. And I had some good jobs up there. Then I made. I started when I was covering so much. I I sat in the office and I started reading the books again, studying a little harder, and I was lucky enough to pass the captain's test. So in 1979, I got promoted to captain. And they said, where do you want to go? I said, well, I was 10 years in Manhattan, 3 years in the Bronx. How about I go to Brooklyn? So where do they send me? Back to Manhattan. But down to the first division, Lower Manhattan. First division and the third division in Manhattan are probably the most difficult areas in the city to work as a fireman, fire officer, or fire chief. The structures are all different. They're all difficult. And the office building fires and the high-rise fires, they're the toughest fires you ever want to have. Subcellars, lofts, everything you can think of. It's the most difficult place to work in the job. You know, everything's different, and I'm surprised more people don't get hurt down there. I was a captain of 33 engine, which is like third, or it's Great Jones in the Bowery, but it's really like 3rd Street. And they were second due to Alphabet City, which was very busy, but they had some difficult loft fires there, subcellars and office buildings. It's a very interesting place to work. I really loved my tenure down there as a captain.
It's interesting, and I'm not discounting what guys learn and gals learn in the fire academy. I think it's pivotal training grounds. And if you're in the city, the knowledge you're getting at the Rock and the instructors you have at the Rock are second to none, I think. But it goes to show, especially when you're getting to busy commands, as you talked about, and you were just talking about your time in Brooklyn, not that you discard it again, but really what you're doing on the fire ground. I'm not going to say that's the real training, but that's dramatically different training than what you were taught in the academy. And I know back then guys were saying to probies, listen, whatever you learned in the academy, throw it out the window, because this is how it's done here. And it's not that they hated the Rock or putting the Rock down. It's more so, the dynamics of the neighborhood, the dynamics of the boxes, what they were running into frequently. And if you're a probie walking into a company like that, especially in Brooklyn, that was getting a crap ton of work back then, especially, them in the Bronx too, you hung on to every word that a guy there with 15, 20, 25 years had. That was the ultimate training. And you know what? Guys of that generation now that are still on the job or retired, the guys of today are hanging on to every word they're saying. And that tradition of passing it down rolls on. So as you brought that up, it jogged that memory for me, So it's a continuing education, Chief, as you know.
Yeah, it's always good to learn from the past and to speak to the senior men and have good officers that have been there and done that. I remember they had this theory that when the guys got promoted, they have to leave the borough, they have to go someplace else, and they have to do this. And I think they want that because eventually, if you become a chief, you become experienced in different areas. But to me, if guys are expert in tenement fires and they get promoted and they want to stay where they are, it'll be better for them and better for the residents, better for the company, because they're experts and they just become experts in their areas. They want you to keep moving around to be a well-rounded fireman, which I don't have a problem with that. But guys do become experts in their areas. They know the buildings. They know where they know where the hydrants are. They know hey, this place we got to stretch it through the A wing. They become experts in the area. That's why I never agree with them. You're having to leave the borough and rotate out of the borough. I never agree with that school of thought. Yeah. Brooklyn was interesting. I did after I left 33. I met a fella who became chief of department, and he taught me how to study for promotion in civil service, and we formed a study club. We used to meet once a week. We each got an assignment that we broke down something, and then we bring it back to the study club, and we would teach the other fellows what we learned, and they would teach us what they learned. And he said, how long are you studying, Joe? How long do you study? I said, well, I do the homework, and that's about it. And he said, no, you have to do the homework. And then the next day you do this, and the next day you do that. He says, you got to put a minimum of 3 hours a day in. I said, what? So I was lucky that I ran into this guy named Tony Fusco, who winds up becoming chief of department. He writes #1 on every test, and he's in my study club. He taught me how to study for civil service. I was studying 5 hours a day for 21 months. I didn't go to the movies. I didn't do anything. I just studied 5 hours a day. And that's how you study for promotion in civil service. It's not that it becomes root memory. You might not know the answer to the question, but somewhere in your subconscious, you've seen it 60 times and you're able to pick out the right answer. So I studied with Tony, and I wrote like a 90 something on my battalion chief's test. And I got made the first day the list came out. So I went from an average student to a top student thanks to Tony Fusco. He really taught me how to study for civil service, and it was great. I became a battalion chief, and I went to Brooklyn, and I really loved it. I enjoyed it. It was tremendous. I just started out oh, by the way, now I'm a battalion chief. Got promoted to lieutenant, got promoted to captain, got promoted to battalion chief. Never had one formal day of training in FDNY in those 3 ranks. They used to have, my lieutenant's tests used to have lists, they used to have what they call OITs, officer instruction training, blah, blah, blah. They would send the new lieutenants to OITs. When I got promoted, they did away with OITs. So I never went to any schools, never took one formal class in my entire career. One day I was a fireman, the next day I was a lieutenant. One day I was a lieutenant, next day I was a captain. Now I'm a battalion chief. I've never had one single day of formal training in my career. Luckily, my first assignment as a battalion chief, they sent me to the 4-4 Battalion in Brownsville, East New York, like the busiest battalion, one of the busiest battalions in the world. And these guys know what they're doing. I don't have to tell them what they're doing. I just stood back and observed, made sure nobody got hurt. And I didn't have to give orders. The men knew what to do. I just wanted to look around, make sure nobody got hurt. So I was learning on the job. So I went from the 4-4 to the 3-4, which is in Bed-Stuy. It's no longer in existence. They cut it down. I did a medical lead there with a 102 truck and 209 engine, which they since disbanded not only the battalion, but the engine. And the guys knew what they were doing. I just tried not to get anybody hurt. I observed. And I used to keep a notebook. After every fire or every emergency, I would write down what went right, what went wrong, what I could have done better. And once a month, I would take that notebook out and I would review it. But I was lucky that I was working in such a busy area. The men were teaching me, basically. Then I went from the 3-4 to the 5-7. And from the 5-7, then I was assigned permanently to the 2-8 in Bushwick. You just said there was a 5th alarm in Bushwick, right?
Yeah. Currently going on right now.
Okay. Bushwick was a great training ground because we had row frames. And yeah, we had a lot of multiples. Gasoline Gomez was running around lighting up the neighborhood. And once they get in the cockloft and the row frames, it goes left and right, and you have transmitting seconds and thirds, and you really learn how to run a bigger fire. The 5-7 had a lot of brownstones, which generally it's a 1-alarm fire. Brownstones pretty much contained, there's 16 inches of brick between the buildings, and it's pretty much a basic fire, brownstone. Top floor is a little smaller, and you have the basement and then the cellar, which were tough getting down to, but it's not going anywhere. It's not like a multiple alarm. But the 2-8 was row frames, and it was hats and horns. Let me tell you, second on arrival, going left and right. A lot of times we only stopped it at the corner. We were lucky. That's where I was, 124 truck, 112 truck, 111 truck. I mean, they were fantastic. The guys were just totally amazing. So I learned how to run a multiple alarm fire there. So when I spent some years in Brooklyn, and I enjoyed every minute of it. It was great. I loved it. And then I had studied so hard. I was a battalion chief like 8 months when they had the deputies test. Now I'm only a battalion chief 8 months, but I had
Really? I didn't
studied
know
so hard for it. I passed the deputies test. 17 guys passed the deputies test, only 17.
Wow.
So I only passed it because I remembered so much stuff from studying for battalion chief. But the timing was impeccable. I'm a battalion chief 7 months and I take the deputies test. I pass. I said, oh, wow, 17 guys. So the city says, oh, man, they must have said this isn't enough. We got to make some changes. So they changed some answers. And I think 17 went to 27. And I came out number 15 on that list. So I was a young battalion chief, and then I was a young deputy chief. But I really had a lot of confidence in myself because of all the work I did in Brooklyn. So it was interesting. My first assignment as a deputy was headquarters. Kenny Serretta and I were the first planning and projects officers. I started that. Oh, by the way, didn't go to a school when I made deputy either. So I was in headquarters for 3 months with Kenny Serretta. Then they sent me out to the 13th Division in Queens. At that time, they weren't very busy at all. I was doing a medical leave for a chief that was sick with cancer. Unfortunately, he passed away. And Queens wasn't that busy. As a matter of fact, I went back to where I grew up, Richmond Hill, 13th Division, by Smoky Park. And the firehouse was on where I did live in newspapers as a newspaper boy. So they asked me to stay there, but I was kind of bored there. They weren't doing a lot of fire duty at that time, 1984, in that section of Queens. Now they are. Back then they weren't. The Bronx was still jumping in 84. It was still, it wasn't like 74, but it was still jumping. So I asked to go back to the Bronx, and they said, what are you, crazy? You want to pay a toll? I said, don't you pay to go to the movies? So I went back over the bridge, paid a toll, went to the 6th Division, and it was the best move I ever made in my life. It was just a great place, and I loved it. And it was still pretty busy in the 80s. It was busy, not like 74, but 80, it was busy. I remember looking at one day I was doing the runs in the workers, and I think we were doing half the amount of work that they were doing 10 years earlier. Half. And still I was going to 3 jobs a night minimum, 3-4 jobs a night, and the drugs were rampant, absolutely rampant on the street. It was wide open. When I would go over to 94 engine and 48 truck was the only occupied building on the street. And they were lined up on the street buying drugs, and there was a guy directing traffic. They would go into the building next door, which was vacant, and there was a hole in the wall to the next building, and they put their money in the hole, and the drugs would come out the hole, and they would walk down the street, and the guy go, next. And it was wide open because the cops wouldn't let the street cops do the busts because the amount of money involved and all that other stuff. Only the narcs could do that. The streets were, it was the Wild West up there. Then Giuliani became mayor. Kelly became police commissioner. Boy, did he clean it up. And we went, they really cleaned up the drugs, the arrests. The fire duty went like this, in the mid 90s. It really slowed down. Giuliani really cleaned it up. He did it, you can argue about where he is today and everything, but back then he was a great mayor. He really cleaned up the city.
Bill Bratton too, as police commissioner.
Bratton, yeah. Kelly, Bratton.
Yep. Both of them really did a great job.
They were good.
They were great for the city, and
And then
that's kind of. Go ahead. Sorry.
and then that brings us to like 9/11. I had to get, but it was interesting how everything. I remember when we moved into the new firehouse on Melrose area, and they welcomed us with 3 9mm through the front door. And when I first went in Washington Avenue, I mean, they killed the bodega owner across the street from me. I'm standing in quarters one night. They killed him. Then there was a bodega to our left. I heard shots. I looked to the left. The perp ran into me as he was running down the street. And there was shots every night, gunfire every night. Fast forward to 10 years, when Giuliani and Brown came in, boy, you didn't hear gunfire every night. And it just got a little more livable. But now it's back to where it was.
Which is an unfortunate thing. I do
It
bring it is an interesting time period. I'm going to get to that time period in your career momentarily, but Gary Stadler had some questions in the chat, and Gary, as I said, I promised I would get to them, and this is a good pause on the show to get to it. Before I continue with the 90s, Gary wanted to know if you were at the following jobs: 23rd Street fire in 66,
Yes,
and the telephone company fire, as well as the blackout of 77.
all three.
All three. What are your memories of each one? Thanks, Gary, for
Oh,
the question.
23rd Street fire, all I did at that fire was man a hand line. The next day, I stood by with a hand line. We called it a watch line. Okay. The telephone company fire, I was in 16 truck. We relocated on the 2nd to 3 truck, which was first due. And during the night, we got called for smoke in here, blah, blah, blah. We went over there. Chief, we stood fast. Luckily, we were upwind not downwind, because the smoke was it's horrible. So I was at the 23rd Street fire, operated a watch line. We relocated the 3 truck. Then we were special call, but I didn't do any work. I didn't go in the building. I know the guy, my friend Donald McCarthy, was the battalion chief in the 10th Battalion. That put him in the 2 rescue companies, went down and put that fire out. Donald's no longer with us. And what was the third one?
No, the blackout of 77.
Oh, yeah. I was a covering lieutenant in the Bronx. That's what really ruined the Bronx. In my area up there were still a lot of stores, like a men's suits place, or a little hardware store, or a liquor store, or a lot of nice bodegas. That night, that was nuts. It was nuts. There was a fire here. There was a fire. The rioters broke into every store, looted everything out of the store, and then set it on fire. Okay? It was terrible. Absolutely terrible. We went out. We were recalled. I got to a phone call at home, get to work. I got in at about 9, 10 o'clock, and we went out the door. We never came back till the next morning, from fire to fire to fire to fire. Unfortunately, what the results of that night were, the good people, which 95% of the people in that area were good people, they wanted to go to buy something in the hardware store. Guess what? No more hardware store. And the guy wasn't coming back because they couldn't get insurance. That whole area was redlined by the insurance companies. Couldn't get insurance. You couldn't buy a bottle of liquor, right? The liquor stores all had plexiglass, bulletproof Lexon. So when you gave your money, you put it in the thing, and the guy was behind the thing, because they were getting robbed all the time. Well, they looted all the liquor stores. You couldn't go out. The local person couldn't go and buy a bottle of booze. They couldn't go buy food. They burnt all the bodegas down, and they burnt all the supermarkets down. They were up on the ground, what was it? I forget. On one of the places, we had to run by, I think it was Jerome Avenue or something. It's a car dealership. And they were driving the cars out of the showroom through the plate glass window. I mean, it was nuts. And that was the complete death of the area. Every store was looted and burnt down, and they never came back. They never came back. Finally, in about that was 77. So about let me think, maybe around 1990 or something like that, a supermarket went up on 163rd Street up there. So the people could finally get some food and stuff, you know. It was over after that. It was a shame.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
Yeah, it was down for a while. As you said earlier, it took a while for it to come back, and that's what brings me, I guess, brings us rather back to the '90s. And this is volume 59 of the Best, the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. Our guest tonight is retired FDNY Deputy Chief Joe DiBernardo. You had gone out to the Gulf. You were activated for the Gulf War at the beginning of 1990. And actually, yeah, we'll touch on that first before I get back to the FDNY, because here you are. It's been a while since Vietnam. Country's in a much different place in 1990 than it was in the 60s. But what you're having is the latest conflagration, the first of many that would carry on to the 21st century in the Middle East. Saddam Hussein is getting a bit too big for his bridges, and the U.S. decided to intervene, and you were activated for that. So tell me about that, because by this point, you got 24 years on the job, and you're a deputy chief.
Yeah, that was when he invaded Kuwait.
Yeah.
Well, I spent 6 years in the Army, active and reserve. And then the draft ended. Remember, they ended the draft in around 1970 something. So nobody was joining the reserves. And everybody went in the reserves because they did not activate the reserves for Vietnam. So everybody was joining the reserves. Now they did away with the draft, so nobody's joining the reserves anymore. I had been offered a commission in the Army, and I had to extend my tour by 18 months. And so I turned that down. I did my 6 years and I got out. In 1970 something, the Coast Guard was recruiting firemen and police to go into their port security units. So they came to the firehouse. They were recruiting because nobody was joining the Coast Guard anymore. I said, well, what do you do? And then the guy said, well, we have a search and rescue station. We run the boats out of there on Long Island Sound. Your prior service, so we'll give you this rank, E6 first class, then you will be obligated because you already did your prior service. So my friend and I, Bruce McCarthy, is no longer with us. We said, let's give it a shot. Well, we're going to go out and ride on the boats. It sounds like fun. So we joined the Coast Guard Reserve, and we were at Station Eaton's Neck, where we went out on the boats. We were training in search and rescue on the boats. It was great. I loved it. And this time they said to me, why don't you take a commission? I said, I don't want to be an officer. They said, well, we'd like you to take a commission. So I took the OQT, Officer's Qualification Test, and to my amazement, I passed it. So I got a direct commission as a lieutenant junior grade, 02. So now that's what they call a Mustang, a person who goes from enlisted to officer. So my first assignment is I get assigned to Governor's Island in some unit, blah, blah, blah. Then they make me commanding officer of a port security unit out on Long Island, and it was great. I loved it. And then my next assignment was planning or something in land area on Governor's Island. I liked that, and I got promoted to lieutenant from lieutenant junior grade. Then blah, blah, blah. I go on and make lieutenant commander, and I get assigned to station, Coast Guard Station Shinnecock, which was a search and rescue station. It was great. We went in on a Friday night. The regulars left, and we took over the search and rescue boats, and they'd come back on Sunday night. So we ran the boats for for the weekend, and I was the CO. It was great. I was there for 3 years, and in all, there's not that many assignments. As you get up in rank, the triangle goes like this, and there's not a lot of paid billets. So I went from there back to the Gullison Island, blah blah blah. So one day I'm working in the firehouse, and the aide says, "Hey, Chief, there's a guy on the phone for you." So I pick it up. Joseph DiBernardo, yes, this is Lieutenant so-and-so from Atlantic area. You're being activated for the Coast Guard for Desert Storm. I said, "Who's this? Come on, stop kidding around." And I hung up. But I thought the guys were kidding around because they knew I was in the reserves. We knew Hassan, he had invaded Kuwait. So there's a lot of talk about what's going to happen. Guy calls back, "Hey, Chief, that guy's on the phone for you again." "Who is this? Come on, stop kidding around. Who is this?" "No, this is really." I said, "Come, stop kidding around. I know you're kidding around." I hung up on him. Third phone call, he said, "Do not hang up on me. You are being activated. You have 72 hours to report. Report to Atlantic area." The world is divided in two. It's land area, PAC area, Atlantic area, Pacific area. So I'm to report to Atlantic area in 72 hours. I said, "Oh my God, you're kidding." I guess my wife was glad to get rid of me, but anyway, so I'm a lieutenant commander. I go, I report in, and it was very interesting. I wanted to go as a port security officer. They were securing all the oil platforms over there and the ports. So I wanted to go get my feet in the sand, but they put me on the battle staff in operations, which we were securing all the ports over there, and we were securing all the ports in America, and we were running all the shipping. Very interesting. I found it very interesting. But I wasn't getting paid a lot of money as a lieutenant commander. So I became very friendly with the admiral. He was a 3-star in charge of Atlantic area, because he was interested in the fire department, and I was interested in what his job was. So I used to tell him stories like I'm telling you. And we became friends. And I said, I really like to get out of here. I already did my time in Vietnam. I did, had boots on the ground in Vietnam. And he said, "Joe, if you can get somebody to replace you, you can leave." So I did it. So I got 2 guys to replace me. And I had my interesting call up for Desert Storm. I didn't get over there, but I contributed something anyway with the safety of the ports and the oil platforms. And I took, managed the desk. We set up a whole 9 yards of, and I wound up getting a good review out of there, and I wound up getting another stripe. So that was good. I wish I could have got over there, but I didn't. But so actually, I'm a Desert Storm veteran too.
Which that's the first I've heard of. You don't see too many of those Vietnam and Desert Storm, especially because of the time
Yeah.
and the length between wars. We're talking essentially almost 20 to 25 years, because Vietnam ended 73. Oh, so it's about 17, 18 years, and then the Gulf War started up.
We stopped really our combat operations around 73. As a matter of fact, I think it was today or yesterday was when they lifted the last Americans out of Vietnam. Remember the famous photograph of them on the roof of the embassy?
Mm-hmm.
That was yesterday, I think, or today.
So 51 years.
1975. And in retrospect, but I don't want to get political, that was a waste. I don't want to get political on anybody, but that was 58,000 guys down the tubes, and people are going on vacation there today.
No, there's nothing political about that. We're not, I mean, as far as the policy, we're not talking about that. But as you said, the loss of life, those are a lot of lives lost in such senseless fashion that never got the chance to live their potential.
Imagine how many Albert Einsteins were in that 58,000, or Jonas Salks or anything. And I say the same thing for Afghanistan and Iraq. We bailed out of Afghanistan. How many Nobel Prize winners. 3,000 guys died over there and girls. And we have gazillion amputees. Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam. What a waste of human life. And believe me, I'm the most patriotic American there is. I put 29 years in the military. So
I understand. No, I get it. It's you see all those faces, and it just makes you sad. It just makes you
without a
sad.
doubt. Without a
Just
doubt.
such a senselessness to it. And transitioning back into the FDNY, as we said, now we'll get to the 90s where the job's changing, as we said earlier, in a good way. Bunker
Yes.
gear's coming in. There's
Yes.
some changes being made. 1998, you guys get 2 squads in the Bronx, citywide order, but 2 of those squads were in the Bronx. They converted 41. 41 had been a squad for some time. They were fighting in the neighborhood, but finally in 98 and went through. And you got 61 converted into a squad as well. So Division 6 for you was humming along, but nevertheless, Chiefs, especially with Chiefs with the amount of years you had on by this point, are always game planning both in the short term and the long term. And I asked this question to Chief Kilduff when I was talking about his time as a battalion chief. And though this is your time as a deputy, I'll ask you the same thing. Short term in the mid 90s, what did you want to accomplish with the FDNY? And long term, and not just the FDNY, but Division 6 as well, what were you looking to accomplish with Division 6, especially as we were getting closer and closer to 2000?
Well, I just wanted them to be as efficient as they were 20 years earlier, because they weren't doing the amount of work that they did. So I was stressing, I would like to stress training for the guys, life-saving training. What I did is I like to drill, because we weren't going to a lot of fires, and we had a couple of mishaps where firemen died at scenes. I used to go and I would, John Salker, John Salker,
Yeah,
right?
he's been on the show. Yep.
Get Out Alive. He did that Get Out Alive thing that really opened my eyes. And you know what? We trained for years to save lives, but we never trained to save our own lives. John started that. I learned a lot from John about different saving our own lives and different tricks. I never forget this one trick, the old Scott mask. Everybody had a Scott, but if you were wearing a Scott mask and you got trapped and you had your own piece of rope, you could take your Scott off and put it up against the windowsill, tie a rope on it, and go out the window. And if you told somebody that, they'd say, no, the mask it doesn't go anywhere. And I would go around and I would tell guys, just that Scott mask and a piece of rope could save your life. Oh, that'll never happen, they used to tell me. And I would say, okay, you want to make a bet? I said, get a Scott, get a length of rope, put it under the window, and see if you can dislodge it. And they couldn't. And then I would give them the one, this was my favorite, one of my favorites was the Fowler Fire. You know that one?
Oh, 1999, Captain Vinnie Fowler. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. They couldn't get him up the stairs.
Right. Yep, that's how he died.
Kept falling out of his clothes, right? Mm-hmm. So this was one of my favorite drills. I would say, let's protect our own. The guy goes down a basement, goes down. I want you to, get the biggest guy, put him down the basement, we'll lights out. I want you to go down and find him and get him up the stairs and see how long this takes. So we put the biggest guy down in the basement, put all the lights out. I'd send one guy down, and when he found him, he gave him Mayday. Then another guy would join him. You'd be surprised how they couldn't get him up the steps. They didn't know the tricks to use with a harness or a rope or webbing. And to get a big guy up the steps when they're dead weight, it's not easy.
Especially with all that gear on, too, on top of that.
Train them on that. They use webbing and different tricks like that. That was one of my favorites, was the man down in the basement. Because I said, look, it might be you down in the basement. It's not easy. And this is funny. There's a couple other evolutions, too. I like the one on the roof where we'd lower the roof rope, but we wouldn't tie it off, because that's going to happen. Where you're going to have to go over the roof, and there's no substantial object for you to tie off on. So you get two guys, they put it around and they hold it, and they're both up. One guy's feet are up against the parapet, and we would go over one guy would go over. At Rescue 3 and Jerry Murtha and I would do this all the time with John LaFemina, John O'Connell, those guys. We'd practice this because sometimes they're going to get it where they don't have it secure. As a matter of fact, I think the Patty Brown rescue, the one you see in Times Square, that wasn't tied off.
Really? Him, Ray McCormack, Kevin Shea?
Yes, I'm pretty sure they didn't have that wasn't tied off. So you got to, you don't want that to happen the first time when in real life situation. You want to have practice it 5-10 times. So we used to do that one. And I loved doing that. I loved all those John Salk evolutions, head first out the ladder, and just a million. He's got like a dozen of them. I made a film about it too. I with Rescue 3, and I went to the chief of department and chief of training and made a proposal, and they said, "Oh, there's too many people who are going to get hurt now doing this." I said, "Well, I'd rather be hurt and break a leg than be dead." So they didn't want to do it. But so they took the tape from me. But I said, "Okay, thanks. I have 5 more. I'll see you." I gave one to each of my battalions. And eventually they taught that at the Division of Training. It took them years to get it through their thick skulls. They didn't want anybody breaking a leg and going head first out the window or whatever. I said, "Well, I'd rather break a leg than die." But I always thought I was a little bit ahead of the curve. The squads, when I was a captain, I said, why don't we have a unit that just goes like a high-rise firefighting engine company specialty, and maybe they could, specialize in high-rise firefighting. When you get a job in a high-rise, they'll come in, special nozzles. Maybe even we can get them in the helicopter training where they come in and land on the roof. And I'll never forget the battalion chief said, "This is the dumbest thing I ever heard of." And fast forward 15 years, guess what? They have high-rise engines. I mean, the battalion chief thought I was an idiot, and they wound up having them. And then Bill Feehan, we were trying to think of how to keep these single engines. That's how the budget, the city wanted to cut. The first thing they look at is a single engine company, like 41 and 61 and 288, and all single engines, okay? But Bill Feehan said, we should come, he called them enhanced engines. So why don't we enhance the engines, give them a specialty? Bill Feehan came up with that idea. And that's what morphed into the squads. In the old days, we had 10 squads. And it was just a manpower. It used to come in, we used to call it the bread truck. It was a big van. And they would come, and all they were was a manpower. They came in with tools. They weren't an engine. They just were a manpower thing. But the job didn't use them properly, because the first battalion chief, every time he used the squad, had to make a special report up. In those days, we had manual typewriters, carbon paper, whiteout. Nobody liked typing with that. When I first made battalion chief, all our reports were hunt and peck. So a lot of times the famous saying back then was squad take up. Squad take up, because the chief didn't want to make out that report. They didn't utilize them properly. So when they made the engines, the squads, good, but they give them the truck work too, very good. And they gave them the proper training. I know when they went to the squads, in the beginning, there was a lot of pushback from the local companies. They were first and second due, they were an engine, third due, they were a squad. So I remember 4160, it was always knocking heads and everything, but it all worked out good. The squads know as much as the rescues now. They're all in SOC, they all go to the rescue school. My son was a plank member of Squad 61. Chief Garrity. Did you know Chief Garrity?
I know the name. I never got to know
Yeah,
Chief
well,
Garrity
he
personally.
came and asked my son if he wanted to go into the squad, because my son was very well known in rescue services because he taught out in Indiana, and he taught down in Tennessee, Nashville, he taught in Baltimore. He taught all those skills. So they were looking for guys with those skills to fill out the squads. So Eddie Garrity was put in charge of, he was a battalion chief at the time, I think, or a deputy, I don't remember. But anyway, he was tasked with that, and he had to get as many qualified guys in there to start. So Joey was a plank member of Squad 61, and he had all that knowledge, which was great. And I think the squads are great. You know, I really do. They're like mini rescues. They have the same tools and the same training. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they eventually, a lot of guys from the squad go to the rescue and special services. That's a whole new kingdom of special services. There wasn't like that when I was a young firefighter. That only started in the 80s with a chief named Duffy from Brooklyn and Ray Downey. Ray made that into a great, great thing. Very specialized guys. They're really sharp and they know their stuff. The rescue school is fantastic. And his son, Ray's son, Ray Downey's son, is now in charge of the rescue school. Joe Downey, in charge of. He's another great guy. He's a chip off the old block of his father. Did you ever spoken to Joe?
No, but we know a lot of the same people. We share a lot of the same friends, Joe and I, and Chuck too.
And Chuck, yeah. Ray was an icon. He was, we just had the anniversary of the Oklahoma bombing, right? About a month ago or so.
Mm-hmm. And he was
Ray
down
went out there.
Yeah.
Ray went out there and
FEMA.
ran that show. Very smart guy. Went down a few hallways with Ray. All right. So how are we doing?
No, we're doing fine. Listen, you're covering a lot of ground, and I appreciate it. And I'm glad you brought up Ray, because that was, and I'm glad you brought up the squads too, because there was something I was going to touch on with you. Where, listen, being in the Bronx, just take the Bronx as that's where you were at the time. And having Rescue 3 in your back pocket is never a bad thing. Because if it really hits the fan, you're glad you have those guys coming. But as a lot of guys, and even rescue guys have come to say this over the years, even if they weren't enthused by the idea in the beginning, we had an evolution going on in New York City in regards to not just the city changing in terms of landscape, the terrorism threat is growing bigger. Because in the beginning, I think guys have said, when they were pitching the idea of the squads, they were saying, and this was Downey's fight for a little bit until they tweaked it, where we're going to do hazmat. And nobody wanted to go on and do hazmat. Now, hazmat's very important, but guys, they naturally want to go to fires. When they added the idea of going to 1075s as well, in addition to hazmat and everything else that came with that, guys jumped at it. And you were able to get senior guys, you were able to get young guys alike to go to that. You got 2 squads per borough. Staten Island didn't have one for the longest time. They finally got one recently with Squad 8. But to see an engine company retain its function as an engine, as you said, first and second do as an engine, but everything outside of that as a squad or a rescue, they can go citywide, especially if a rescue is unavailable at any given moment because it might be out in a separate call. That's something that really, really, really helped matters. And what's sad about it, I mean, now it's still a great operation, but I think Ray Downey had it humming at the peak of its powers in the summer of 2001 because he blended the rescues, which he already had, and he was a longtime Rescue 2 guy, as you know, with the squads. He created the vision. He saw a lot of the foreshadowings with terrorism, having gone down to Oklahoma City in 1995, having responded to the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. And then we get that terrible day. And before I even touch on 9/11 briefly with you, and I'm sure you were thinking about it, but I'll let you tell the audience for yourself, how much of a concern, especially after 93 and some of the other stuff we were seeing happening around the world, Khobar Towers, 96, the embassy bombing in 98 in Africa, the Cole bombing in 2000, how much was terrorism on your mind specifically, Chief?
Well, I think the 93 bombing, I was at that also. It sort of woke us up a little. I still don't think that, I'm waiting for the next shoe to fall. Let's put it that way. I'm surprised.
You're not the only one.
And the trades, the 93 bombing, I operated at that. That was interesting. But if you would have told me that the World Trade Center is going to collapse from fire, I would say never happened. Never happened. And I still don't believe it happened. You know, I just, you know, if we could go back in time, I would think it would have been a local collapse. In other words, no high-rise building ever collapsed in the history of firefighting in the United States. There was a fire, I think it was in Philly, that burned for 3 days or something like that. There was no collapse. Terrorism. Well, I did, you know, it was always in the back of my mind because the Coast Guard sent me to counterterrorism school in my port security realm. I had to learn about counterterrorism and all that other stuff. So it was always in the back of my mind, and to this day it is in the back. I'm still waiting for the other shoe to fall with all that's going on in this country. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. There's people in this country that they hate us, and then it's going to happen. So it's always on my mind. And yeah, that was definitely, you know, counterterrorism since '93 has been on my mind. They just put that truck in the wrong spot. They some hole. Kevin, what's his name? Lucky he's alive. And you mentioned Kevin Shea.
Yeah.
If he would have fell 6 inches to the left, he would have been impaled with the rebar. Yeah. I just did a seminar out in Texas in March, and Kevin was supposed to be one of my guest speakers, but his mother passed away, so he couldn't make it. Interesting guy, big hunter, fisherman.
He's out in Montana.
Montana. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Trying to get him on the show.
Well, he's out in Montana, man. Yeah. I think although I did hear rumors about him taking a job somewhere, that might be changing. Let's just say you heard it from you heard it from me first. So he might be getting in. He might be coming back this way.
All right, good. You could use his expertise. I mean, his expertise is valuable to have.
Yes.
Not even for that experience alone or the roof rope rescue, but the guy was in rescue for quite a long time and learned from a lot of great people. You know,
rescues. I relied on them, man. Billy Ryan, he just passed away, was the captain when I first went up there, and then Ralph Tiso.
Another legend.
Without a doubt, a legend. And I remember going to jobs. We had a new covering battalion chief or a new battalion chief, and he's like pulling everybody out of the building, the taxpayer. So once you come out of a taxpayer, that's the end of it. The poor mom and pop store on the end, that's going to get burnt down and flooded. So I was always very aggressive at taxpayer fires. Ralph, when the rescue came in, I always gave them the roof. And who's the officer but Ralph? And the battalion chief's pulling him out. I'm saying, wait a minute, who's up? Division 6, Rescue 3. What do you got, Ralph? He says, give me 4 minutes, and we got this. I said, you got it. He said, hold off, I'm pulling him out. He got the roof open, ceilings down. We went in, put the fire out, stayed in one store. Now, if I was an inexperienced deputy, I had an inexperienced battalion chief, I would have pulled him out. We would have went to an outside operation with tower ladders. And if you didn't get water damage, you get fire damage and smoke, we would have burnt the block down. So Ralph was great to work with. Ralph was just great. I relied on the experts, and the experts were like rescue and some senior officers that I worked with. I had collapses, and I had like these guys in rescue were just experts, like Mickey Conboy. I had a collapse once, and I said, Mick, what are we doing? We pulling out, or what are we doing? He said, just give it, I think we got it. Let's sure it. He'll do that, this, that, and the other. The safety chief is telling us to pull it out. And Mickey's saying, just do this. And we do this, and we go in, and we do what we got to do, and we go home. So I really relied on those experienced rescue officers and some, experienced guys like that I wasn't afraid to make the decision, let's put it that way, based on working with great experienced firefighters.
Helps a lot. That naturally helps a lot. One thing I will say, and you mentioned you're still giving seminars here and there, is that it's never, I can't even say you retired, because you signed the paperwork, you went to the pension section in 2001, and you left the FDNY, but you're one of those guys where the fire service hasn't stopped for you. You're still teaching, you're still speaking, it's still engaging. So, I mean, as you said earlier about the job evolving, I mean, that was in the 90s that we were talking about. The job from when you left it in 2001, not even just in New York City, but worldwide, forget nationwide, to where it is now, as we're sitting here talking on May 1st, 2024, is night and day. So for you, one of the things I wanted to ask you was, what do you like most about where the job is at? And what do you feel in 2024 and beyond the job as a whole, anywhere in the world, needs to improve on?
Well, I think they're much more aware of the carcinogens that get on the clothing and everything. They have 2 sets of bunker gear. They come back from a job, they clean it, they take a shower, they get all that. They don't bring that crap home with them. That's killing. That all the guys I work with, they're all dying of cancer. So it's gotten, and they wear mandatory masks. I think is a good thing, because that's another thing. All my friends are dying of cancer from back then. So I think that's come a long way. The technology is improving. Like as a chief, I had a clipboard, and the back of the building, I can't see the back of the building, so I don't know what's going on back there. But I had a trick to figure that one out anyway. Every division's got a van driver. When I went to the 6th Division, I said, where's the van driver? They said, he's in his company. I said, what's he doing in his company? Well, he stays there until we need him, and then we call him. I said, that's not how it's going to work. Bring him into the office. I made the van driver. I said, I gave him a radio. I said, every time we go out the door, you come with us, and you're in the van. You go to the rear yard, and you tell me what's going on in the rear yard. You're my eyes and ears back there. Now they have, if the job has really gotten a lot better, now you got a bazillion chiefs at the job. When I was back then, we used to get 3 and 2 on the 3 engines, 2 trucks on the first alarm. The second alarm, we get 3 engines and 1 truck. Now you get like 16 chiefs at the job, and you get 4 and 2 on each alarm, which is great. It's great. So you have a lot of eyes and ears and control and command at the buildings. In the old days, we didn't have that. So I used the van driver. He was my eyes and ears. Now today they have they got all this technology that using it's great. They can tell where you are in the building. God forbid you go down. The tracking system they have, which is great. They have in that drone unit. I think that's great. You're going to see robotic firemen in the next 20, probably less. You are. I'm telling you, man. I remember that one thing they had, that they used the robot at that building collapse.
Yes.
Remember? It went in and fell over. The dog went in and fell over. But they're going to get better at that. You know what put the fire out in Notre Dame in Paris?
What?
Guess what? A robot.
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. A gigantic robot that shoots water somehow. They sent him in because everything was collapsing at Notre Dame. And the robot put the fire out. See, a lot of people don't know that. I'm telling you, you're going to be using robots for search. You know?
We have drones now. And that's the thing. There's collapses now in the city where they're using drones to get footage.
It's great. You see at the sporting events, the drones fly over the crowd. They fly down the hallway. That's pretty controllable. Now you could put it, you could probably get the drone to take out the window and then fly around in there. That collapse they had down in the East Village last year, Mike McPartland had the job. Remember?
Mhm.
It was a gas explosion.
Oh yeah.
Okay, like Second Avenue, 33 and 9 were first due. And that thing, the guys on the roof just got to the parapet when the roof went in. And Rescue 1 was on like the second floor, and it collapsed down to almost just stopped right over their heads. Mike McPartland had that job. I was watching it on TV live. Vinny Dunn was the commentator. Man, speak on legends. There's a legend, Vinny Dunn.
Yeah, man, he's a good friend. He's been on the show as well.
What a writer. He's amazing, man. And he has so much knowledge. And he's given that knowledge out there to everybody. Great guy. Great guy.
Mm-hmm. Still
So
very sharp as well.
Yeah, he's no kid either. He was at the 23rd Street fire.
He's a lieutenant there. Yep. He's a lieutenant there.
Yeah. He was a lieutenant in 33 engine. Mm-hmm. 33 engine. And 18 gets sent around here, and 30. He was standing there with Joe Priori, lieutenant in 18 engine, 33, 18. And Riley, the deputy, said, "You take a line into the drugstore, you take a line." And the guy that went in the drugstore, Priori, went through the floor and the whole company was killed. So just by this, Vinny's alive. It's just a matter of fate. Hey, there's a lot of fate involved in firefighting too, a lot of luck. And I always say, one of my sayings is, better be lucky than good. It's better to be lucky than good. How did you, like, hey guys, let's go outside, take a blow, relax. We go out. 30 seconds later, the floor collapses, goes into the basement. It's amazing. It was always a matter of luck. I had this job on Nelson and 167, 150 by 150, 5-story H, vacant. It's going like a Roman candle. We were aggressive. We were always very aggressive in 6th Division. And guy from Rescue 3 is in Exposure 3, and he said, "Chief, I see a crack developing." I said, "Ooh, let me back up." I was going to put 44 truck in Exposure 2, but they couldn't get the tower. I couldn't get the tower ladder in Exposure 2 because there was a pile of debris of old bricks, so I couldn't get the tower ladder in there. So I didn't put them there. Make a long story short, we went interior, and we were doing pretty good. And this guy from 3 said, "Chief, I see a crack developing." So I gave a mayday. I said, "Everybody out now. Drop your lines and get out now." Where the building came down, they made the cover of Firehouse magazine. Matt Daly took the picture. Where I was going to put 44 truck, that's where the building came down. Matter of luck. Better be lucky than good. And I mean, I could tell you 24 instances where we'd walk down the alley, we'd walk back out, the building came down. We walk out of the room, the floor collapsed. Guys, I seen guys come out the window, room lit up, come out the window, and they just happened to land on the fire escape. They didn't know it was a fire escape there. They just dove out the window, just luck. So I always say it's better to be lucky than good. But it's also good to, here's another one, I think, knowledge. You make your own luck too if you don't have the knowledge and the experience. You can make your own luck. But I was lucky because I had the best firemen in the world and the best officers and the best chiefs. So I was lucky. I always say I was lucky to have the greatest guys in the world. Once a guy told me, "How do you do it? How do you do it?" I said, "Because I don't do it. These guys do it. They make me look good. They make me look good." Yeah, that's true. You could be the best chief in the world if you don't have good firefighters, you're not going to put the fire out. Or you could be the worst chief in the world and look good because you have great firefighters. Am I right? It's, this isn't an exact science, firefighting. It's like combat. As soon as the first shot's fired, it goes out the window. And you never know when the red devil's going to jump up and bite you. You never know. And there's no such thing as a routine fire. Because the fire of Black Sunday, typical tenement fire, been through 1,000 of them, right? And look what happened there. Illegal partitions, hidden walls, stuff that's going to jump up and bite you. And it did that day. So you never know. You take every run as an individual run. Don't become complacent. Study, drill, train, be aggressive. Like the great ones always trained and trained and trained. That's what my philosophy is anyway. I wish I would have drilled a little more as a company officer, but you know what? We were going to so many fires, I didn't have to drill. Today, it's different. That's why you have to drill and train. Because you're not getting the fire duty that was back in those nutty days. 300,000 people in the 60s and the 70s lived in the South Bronx that were gone, just gone. 300,000 people. Just think of those numbers. It's amazing. You've seen photographs, right? It looks like Berlin. I'll never forget the box, Charlotte in 170, famous photograph. There's about 3 buildings standing in the area. It was like Berlin. Same thing on the Lower East Side, man. Now you can't even, you could get a tenement for back taxes back in those days on the Lower East Side. Now they're millions and millions and millions of dollars. Alphabet City is very pretty cool now. They got boutiques and everything down there. You remember Alphabet City, right? 28 and 11, man, they were rocking and rolling in those days. Great companies.
Great companies indeed. And that's it's really, I don't even know how to describe it, but you're right. I was thinking about it, and all the moments I've heard guys tell me about over the years where luck factors in, good fortune factors in. Not even the training, not to say that the training isn't important. Sure it is. It's going to save your life. But just those moments where something broke right. And you hear that with 9/11. One guy went here where the other guy went there, and the difference is feet between living and dying. Danny
That's
Nitro
amazing.
talked about that, when he was on a while ago, that morning, him standing in one location, whereas Chief Gansey was in another one, was the difference between Danny being
Life
here today and Chief Gansey, unfortunately, not being here today. And one thing I did want to talk about with you before the rapid fire, because it shouldn't go unmentioned. And Stu Kelsaw, I see your question. I shouldn't forget this question. I'll ask you my question momentarily. But Stu Kelsaw had a good one, and I'm glad you sent it, which he asked, question for the chief. What would you say was your biggest frustration on the job? And was there anything you would have liked to have seen implemented that ultimately was not? And thank you, Stu, for that question. It's
my biggest frustration, it's probably dealing with headquarters. Because, the guys in headquarters on the staff, a lot of them are really great guys and dedicated and intelligent guys. But they didn't pass any more tests than I did. They are all deputy chiefs. And then they politically went up, because I was on the staff at one time. I was a deputy assistant chief. So now that they're staff chiefs, for some reason they think they're smarter than you. So their ideas are good and your ideas are not. So that was kind of frustrating dealing with headquarters. Perfect example is when I did the Get Out Alive tapes to save our guys. And it was frustrating dealing with training and the chief of the department's office, because they didn't want lawsuits, and they didn't want to get injuries. So it was frustrating dealing with training, or with headquarters, or with a superior in the borough they were steadfast in their thinking, that they weren't open to new ideas. They didn't want to rock the boat, or they didn't have the courage to make a decision. They just did that. Probably frustration was dealing with headquarters. There was also some frustration with guys that shouldn't have, with moving guys out of your area because they just couldn't do the job. But when you did that, you were just moving the problem. You're getting rid of your problem and you're giving your problem to another person. You know, they used to lift guys because the guy was bad. So now you took a guy who was bad and you gave him to another guy. So you're not doing the job any favors. So it's kind of frustrating dealing with some of the people in head, not all of them, some of them, because they thought they were smarter than you. And really, the smartest guys I ever met in the job were all firemen, lieutenants. They weren't chiefs. I mean, there were many brilliant chiefs. Maybe I'm giving the wrong impression, but it was frustrating dealing with some headquarters. What was the second part of that question?
Changes that you wanted to see implemented that ultimately were not.
That were not. Well, I wanted to see the squads. I envisioned the squads, but that they became a reality. What was not implemented? Well, I wanted that training bulletin. They made that. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Eventually, they all came about. The things that they thought was stupid, because at the next level, they thought it was stupid, but they came about. The squads came about. High-rise engines came about. Get out alive came about. So there, I don't know if does that answer the question?
It does, because listen, if there's nothing, then that's fine too. That means you got a lot of what you wanted done. That's definitely ideal in a career.
Today, though, I must say that guys are frustrated because there are some people that are incompetent and there's nothing they can do about it. And if they try to address the issue, usually they lose, because some people on the job are incompetent. And if you try to do anything with them, it seems, from what I've heard, the officer winds up getting moved and not the incompetent person. Now, I didn't experience that, but I know that people are experiencing that today. So that's not a good thing. You know, merit matters in my mind. Meritocracy matters. I want the best. If I'm in a bad hole, I'm in a bad position, I want the best qualified person coming from me. So I think they should not ever lower the standards for the fire service, police service, or the military. I think the standards should be held high. And of course, we're getting into an area that's very prevalent in the country today. We don't want to go there, but I think you should be the best at. If you get a 98 on a test, you should get promoted before the guy that gets a 95 on a test. That's all. I don't want to see the watering down, the deterioration of the physical and mental requirements for our job. I want to keep the standards high. I don't know. That's all.
Oh, you're right. Paul Mannix and I had a similar conversation when he was on last year, finished up as a deputy chief on the job.
Yes, I know him well. He's a great
guy. Good guy. His sister was an ESU lieutenant for many years and was highly regarded in her work as well on the police side of things. And same thing. Oh. That was his philosophy. Merit matters, which is, listen, you don't want to give someone something, not to go down the rabbit hole. We're not going to, but if you're giving I'll put it this way, and I concur with you completely. If you're giving someone something based on what they may look like, as opposed to how they did on a test or how they measure up statistically compared to someone else, even if the intention is good, the promotion at best is a backhanded compliment. Exactly. And I don't want to get it. I'm Hispanic. I don't want to get it just because I'm Hispanic. I want to get it because I earned it.
Yeah. Who do you want operating on you? The most qualified doctor, or somebody that is less qualified? I want the most qualified doctor.
Right. Who do you want coming for you at a fire? Like you said, the most qualified firefighters, or somebody that may have gotten
physical, not only mentally but physical capabilities. I mean, it's a tough job. I mean, I was in a truck, but I wasn't a great truckie because I think you need two things to be a great truckie. You got to be tall, and you got to be strong, upper body strength. The hardest thing I ever did was pull tin ceilings in a taxpayer in a smoke condition. And so I'm just saying that, I wasn't a great trucker because I wasn't tall or strong. So, the physical capability should be very high. Mental even though it's a tough, nasty job being a fireman, and it takes a courage and strength. Also, you got to think. You got to have a head on your shoulders. You can't, I wouldn't want a nitwit. My life depended on a nitwit back there, So, but yeah, I think they should keep the standards high in the military and all civil service jobs. I want the policeman that's carrying a 9mm to be an intelligent, smart person, because I don't want him beating me over the head with his 9mm.
No, you don't. I agree with that. Before I get to my question on your foundation and the rapid fire, I didn't want to ignore this. Tyson Moser in the chat just wants to know, which staff position exactly did you have as a deputy assistant chief?
I was Car 3 Bravo, which was a special assistant to the chief of department.
Oh, nice.
I was a special assistant to Chief Fusco.
Mm-hmm.
And it was good. I put out his brush fires, and then he sent me on special assignments. You had Dan Nigro on?
Yes.
When he reported to me when he was promoted from battalion chief to deputy, Nigro reported to me.
Oh, wow.
And I was on a project with him rewriting the fire prevention code. So Danny reported to me. As a matter of fact, when we absorbed the emergency EMS into the fire service, I had experienced a lot of problems with EMS because the guys would get a call at 2:00 in the morning, do a carry, because the 2 EMS people could not do the carry. So they called the guys at 2. There was a lot of headbutting back in those days with EMS and fire. It was always a problem. Always a problem. Like I remember we had a job in Harlem. A 90-year-old woman, the fire was in her living room. I think it was 30 truck, put the aerial up, went up, got her out of the kitchen, held her on the end of the aerial till they put the fire out. Then they brought it back in. It was about the 7th floor. And I remember that EM was working fire. So EMS came in, and I told the EMS personnel, could you go to the floor below the fire? We have an injured 97-year-old woman. And she said, I'm not going in that building. There's a smoke condition. I said, well, I'm ordering you in the building. The fire's under control, and I'm ordering you to the floor below the fire. So this person lodged a complaint against me, saying that I cursed at her, and I ordered her in the building. She went in the lobby, and then she went sick. There was no smoke in the lobby, but she went sick. So I had a lot of problems with the guys and the EMS community. So I knew there was a problem. Well, Chief Fusco asked me to take over, become chief of EMS when I was Car 3B. And I said, no, thank you. I don't want that. But I have a guy for you, a very intelligent guy. You know, Danny Nigro was on Jeopardy. Did you know that?
No, he really?
Danny Nigro was appointed in late 60s. And he was appointed to 21 Engine in Manhattan. He was on Jeopardy. I'll never forget that. He's brilliant. Danny's brilliant. Nice guy. Class act. So great fireman, great lieutenant up in 35 Engine, I believe. I don't know where he was the captain. He wound up in the 2-8 Battalion, where I was, after me. He makes deputy. He reports to me. He's brilliant. I said, I don't want that job. I wouldn't take that in a million years, but I got the guy for you. Danny Nigro. That's how Danny Nigro became chief of EMS. He went from a deputy to like 64 stars overnight. He was a great guy, Danny. Great guy.
Yeah,
Plus, he became fire commissioner, and that's another story. I don't even want to go there.
Chief of department.
Chief of department, great guy. His best friend was Pete Gansey. When I was in the 2-8, Pete Gansey was a lieutenant next door in 124 truck. Him and I were good friends. My aide in the 2-8 was Steve Muzziello, who winds up becoming Chief Gansey's aide. Steve dies of throat cancer from 9/11. But I mean, we're all 6 degrees of separation. We're all connected some way. Danny becomes, I never forget when he was thinking about becoming FI commissioner. I was at a dinner with him, and he just told me it was like on his list, and he did. He became FI commissioner. But when you're FI commissioner, you serve at the whim of the mayor, and you do what he tells you to do. And that's all I have to say. Danny was liked in every rank in the fire department, in the uniform fire department. Then he put a suit on. And of course, when you put a suit on, you got to listen to the suits. That's enough said there. I like Danny.
So do I. Dan's a gentleman, as you said. As I was going to ask you about before the rapid fire, people know by now the story of your son and his heroics over the course of his career, stellar career, and his injuries at Black Sunday and his fight until he succumbed to them. But you've carried on a legacy, you and your wife, Barbara, who was a sweetheart. His legacy has been carried on wonderfully through the foundation bearing his name. So for those not familiar with it, and we will link it in the description of this episode for sure, tell us, by all means, what is the mission of the foundation and how are you helping the fire service through it?
All right. Well, as you know, Black Sunday was the day the brothers would, okay. The personal safety ropes had reached their 10-year shelf life. Commissioner Von Essen said that they don't use them, so we're going to replace them. So guys don't even carry them; they're too heavy. And I think we had 7 documented bailouts. And to me, that's like the cop that works down the block there never took his gun out of his holster in 20 years. So cost-cutting measure, let's take his gun away because he's never used it, and we'll put him out on the street without his gun. That's interesting. So they only used him 7 times. My answer to that was, well, that's 7 less funerals you had to go to. And the chiefs all wrote recommendations that they do not remove the safety ropes. The UFA's Charlie Bohan wrote, he was the safety officer. He said, do not take the ropes away. The safety battalion chief said, do not take the ropes away. They couldn't find the $1 million for the ropes, or what, $2 million, whatever it was. So they took the ropes away. Guys go to a fire, tenement fire, but 1,000 of them. Except this one, like I said, no 2 fires are the same. They had partitioned off the apartment to make it illegal occupancies, single room occupancies, put a wall up where you couldn't get to the fire escape. And to make matters worse, it was a blizzard that night, frozen hydrants, delayed response. So you got a couple of things going wrong against you from the start. Frozen hydrants, delayed response, blah, blah, blah. Typical 1,000 times tenement fire. They go up, but it's not typical because of all these little idiosyncrasies that are popping up. The fire started on the 3rd floor, went up, spread to the 4th floor. They were 5 stories above grade in the rear, 4-story building, but 5 stories above grade. So it's roaring behind one of these illegal partitions. It goes up, it extends to the top floor, and the guys are in the apartment, and it comes roaring down the hall. And then the wind driven, roaring down the hall. Now the fire's looking for oxygen, so it reversed itself. The guys are in the bedroom, in the living room. Eugene Stolowski, Brendan Coley, Kurt Myron, Jeff Cooler in the living room. Joey's in the adjoining bedroom. And John Ballou comes up. We're not quite sure where John was. But the fire roared down. Jeff put a little hole in the wall in the kitchen, and he's got fire there. He turns around, he walks in to tell the guys in 27 truck, hey, I got fire here. Turns around, there's a ball of fire heading his way, like that. So they're hanging out the window. John Ballou is on the far right window. He leaps to get to the fire escape, which he's blocked off from. He misses it, dies on impact, 5 stories below. The next window is Lieutenant Myron, Eugene, and Brendan. Eugene lowers Myron, lowers Brendan, and then he's got to go. He's burning up. Eugene dives out the window. His coat gets hooked up on the child guard, swings him around like this, which saved his life, by the way. Eugene reaches around and frees himself and goes foot first. Myron dies on impact. Corley doesn't die, and Eugene winds up with his cranium is separated from his spinal column. Imagine that. They didn't know that immediately. I was in the hospital when the doctor was going to operate on Gene, and I said, "Doc, level me. What's going on?" He says, "He'll 1 in 1,000 if he'll walk again." Guess what? Eugene walks. He's a miracle man. Okay, the next window is Jeff Cool. Jeff's laid out on top of an air conditioner. Fire's coming out over his head. He's got a rope, his own personal rope that he bought. But there's so much fire, he can't turn around. There's no place for him to tie it off. Out the next window, Joey's head pops out. He sees Jeff. Jeff says to Joey, "I have a rope. I have no place to tie it off. I will lower you." What a brave thing. He's just offering his life up for another brother. A very heroic act. Joey says to him, "You have a wife and kids. Throw me the rope." No time to argue. Throw me the rope. So Joey's going to give his life up for Jeff. So I always use those words, famous words in firefighting, to me anyways. Throw me the rope. Jeff throws him the rope. Joey wraps it around his body. His room is filling with smoke and fire. Jeff's room is burning up. He wraps it around his arm and his body. Jeff goes out the window. He pendulums, hits the side of the building, loses control, and falls in the alleyway. But that 10 feet probably saved his life. But I mean, he's all broken up, and he's a mess. Everything's broken. They all broke their that one bone in the middle that cut all their organs and everything. They're a mess, all of them. Then Joey went out the window, lost control. I believe he tied it on the child guard, and then he went out, lost control, and he fell 5 stories in the rear. He broke everything below his waist. And he's the joke. I got more screws in me, and got more metal in me than a Kia. Well, anyway, that's that story. And then at the same time, a brother died in Brooklyn.
Richie Sclafani.
Richie Sclafani, yes, he died in Brooklyn. So it's the first time that 2 firemen, but that firemen died in different boroughs on the same day. Was the Black Sunday fire. So eventually, Gene, Joey, and Jeff and Brendan, came out of the hospital. They were in nursing homes and everything, and they had to learn how to walk again and everything. What a tragic thing. So fast forward, Joey wound up dying. He was taking medication for all his injuries and everything, and then he was in coma and all that stuff. He had short-term memory problems. He had a concussion. He would forget that he did things. So we surmise he took his medication that night. Then he forgot he took it, and he took it again, and he never woke up. He was taking pain medication for his injuries. So if he didn't have to jump out the window, he wouldn't be on pain meds, and he wouldn't be with us today. He was, I believe, the youngest instructor to ever teach at the rescue school was SOC. They asked him to come over, and he said, "I'm a young guy." I don't want to teach senior men. They said, no, you got the knowledge, kid. We want you here. So he was very well respected throughout the country. He would go to do FDIC and teach for them, collapse, man versus machine, all that. He was involved in everything. He had all the rescue disciplines, smart dude. But Joey passed away, and John Salker and Mike Dugan, you know Mike Dugan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Famous photograph with the American flag at 9/11. Mike Dugan and John Salker said, why don't we do something in Joey's memory? And Kevin Yost, who you had on, why don't we do something in Joey's memory? I said, well, what do you want to do? We'll start a foundation, and the purpose will be to buy fireman safety ropes. I said, let me look into it. So I did all my research on how to form a 501(c) not-for-profit. I downloaded all the forms. I really had trouble answering some of the questions. I went and knocked on a local CPA's door, said, could you help me? And he helped me. We formed the Lieutenant Joseph DiBernardo Memorial Foundation in Joey's memory. And 12 years ago, we gave our first presentation with Vinny Dunn and John Salker and all the heavy hitters at a Brookhaven National Lab. And then every year we move to we got more students, and we get the best instructors in America. And we got into an agreement with the Suffolk County Fire Academy, where I bought them a flashover simulator, and they help us teach. So we have a nice agreement with them. And my seminar in November, we got Navy SEALs, Medal of Honor winners. We have the people come from all over America, Hawaii, Canada, and learn. We got great following from New England. We had 360 firemen from around the country in our November seminar last year on Long Island. And then 3 years ago, we started to go to Texas, outside of Houston, Texas, to give a seminar. And we had 160 students in Texas this year. And that's where Kevin Shea was coming to teach for us when his mother passed away. And we had the best, Vinny Dunn, John Salker, Mike Dugan, and then we usually have a guest speaker like Ryan Parrott, who was a Navy SEAL, got blown out of a Hummer in Iraq. And he's the head of the Sons of the Flag, which is a Burn Center foundation. Chris Kyle, American Sniper, his father sends me money every year. Bob Farrell, the profits from his book every year. Dennis Leary, the actor, whose cousin died in the Worcester fire, sends us a large check every year. As a matter of fact, this Friday, Leary has a fundraiser for FDNY every year. He's given them millions of dollars. He's bought them apparatus, everything. Every year he has a Be a Firefighter for a Day event where corporate people enter teams, make a $50,000 donation, and they enter these teams and they become a firefighter for a day at the Rock. They go through all the training. I'm bringing a team in there this Friday. They don't charge me, naturally. I made up a team of nurses. It's going to be really cool. So we have, I've raised a lot of money over the years, for 12 years. The only year we missed was the year of COVID. And I'll read you the numbers.
Go ahead, sure.
In 2023, we provided 14 departments, a total of 324 PSS, personal safety systems. Plus there's $200,546 last year. Okay. To date, the Lieutenant Joseph DiBernardo Memorial Foundation, we've given out $1,057,545, 97 departments across America that can't afford to buy their own. These little departments in Tennessee, in West Virginia, Ohio, New England. In 97 departments in 25 states, we've purchased 1,922 safety systems, PSS. And then that's the training that goes with it. You just can't give them the PSS. They have to be trained in it. So, and we've trained over 2,500 firefighters at our seminar. Now, these 2,500 firefighters have gone back to their department. They've trained their platoon, who's trained their company. So it's exponential. So we've trained thousands and thousands. And I can't tell you how many lives we've saved and property. Because we give live burns and we, do extrications. We overturn buses, flashovers, you name it. We do trench rescue. We do elevator rescue. We go to the local university and they're rappelling down 20-story buildings in the shafts. Now, where do you get that training? New York City doesn't have that training. I give it. The school is grateful that we train. They partnered with us. We can use their elevators. I don't know any department in the world that goes down 20-story elevator shafts, but we do it. We put buses on top of cars. We do live burns we cut with saws and all that stuff. And really, and the guys that come down from New England and out west say the best training they've ever had. A lot of departments don't do live burns anymore. For insurance purposes, we do live burns. We got a great following from New England. That's it. And a lot of professional firefighters come to us. The Texas firefighters are just great. They're just great. I had the chief from San Bernardino this year asked me to come and give a class in San Bernardino. I said, look, I'm getting old. 2 classes a year enough for me. And they had 3-day seminars, 3 full days. And when I got home from Texas this year, I slept for a day. But it's great. And listen, it's a great cause. Even if you just send $10, send $10. Because if 100 of you send $10, 200, we can buy another rope for somebody. And I go by demographics. One of the things on your application is you have to tell me what your average income is, what the average home value is, and your rate of poverty. So if you live in a neighborhood with an 800,000 median income house, say that income is median income is 150,000. The houses are worth 800,000, and it's 1% poverty rate. Guess what? I'm not giving you a grant. I'm giving it to the guy in Tennessee that's poor, and the guy in Ohio that's poor. Because like where I come from in Long Island, they're all wealthy. Long Island is a wealthy. The departments are well funded out here. They don't need my help. But Tennessee, Ohio, Kansas, up in New England, small towns, very poor. They can't afford it. So I buy it for them, or we buy it for them. And I have great friends, Dennis Leary, Bob Farrell, Navy SEALs, Medal of Honor winners, you name it, great guys. They're all very generous. And everybody on my board, they're all nobody gets paid. Everybody's a volunteer, and they give their time up to help us raise money. It's a great cause. So send your money in, folks.
I put the link in the chat.
JoeyDFoundation.org. You can't beat it. You save a life. Thank you, man. There you go.
No problem. It's in the chat for those of you that want to access it. And like I said, I will be linking it in the description of this episode. Well, 2 hours.
I gave $1 million away. Imagine that. We started out with nothing.
And you're able to give $1 million away.
I think that's amazing.
Paying it forward, Chief.
Yeah.
That's the best thing to do. And certainly those departments, and it is a brotherhood nationwide, worldwide, but those departments will never forget that. They'll never forget it. So thank you for what you're doing. And we certainly thank your son for all the contributions he gave to the fire service over the years. And we thank Mrs. DiBernardo, because she had a son of the fire service. She had you in the fire service. So it couldn't have been easy for her. But you know what? Again, she's a sweetheart of a woman. And I know she's watching tonight. So thank you, Mrs. DiBernardo, for letting me steal your husband for a couple hours.
Oh, she loves it.
While we revisited his excellent career. But you know what, Chief? You're not off the hook yet, because now it's time for the rapid fire.
Oh, so I hope I get all the answers here. Hey, by the way, I wouldn't change a thing. If I could go back in time, my son got to live his dream. He got to
Yes,
live
sir.
his dream. I took him to the firehouse when he was a little boy, played love fire engines. He got to live his dream. And if I could go back in time, I wouldn't change a thing.
There you go. There you go. Well said, Chief. Nothing I have to follow that up because nothing could follow it up. And then in line, we go to the rapid fire, which is 5 hit and run questions. They're not particularly hard ones. I just like to joke around with the guest. But here you could say multiple. If you don't have anything, it's fine. You could say pass. So here's one where if one comes to mind, good. If multiple, that's okay too. Funniest call you ever responded to at any point in your career.
Funny is cool. Hey, we had a job on a concourse once, and the guys there was something off about it. I don't know. There was something that just wasn't right. I went up, and it was 92 and 44 were first due. And they're all giggling and laughing and slapping each other on the back. I said, what the hell's going on here, guys? We had a fire in a weed joint. So the weed was burning. And they all was smoking, getting in the marijuana smoke. They were all, that's what was on fire. So they all were like stoned when I got up there. They were all slapping each other on the back and laughing and giggling. What the hell's going on? Then I got that pungent smell. I said, oh no, the weed was on fire. That was pretty funny. On a call. I mean, I had said a lot of funny things in the job, but that was funny.
No, that's sad. I've never heard. That's a first. I never heard that one before.
Weed.
Of all things, most uplifting call you ever responded to.
That's a tough one. There's nothing better than crawling in and coming across a victim and then getting them out and bringing them back. So I guess, and that happened to me on multiple occasions. So it was very nice that you save lives. Directly involved in saving lives on multiple occasions, where I went in and we made a grab, pulled them out, and another 5 minutes they would have been dead. We worked on them and they lived. So it's a feeling of great accomplishment when you save someone's life.
Absolutely. Third, favorite firehouse meal, because I'm sure you work with a really good roster of cooks.
Oh man, that's easy. Raviolis, meatball, and sausage from Arthur Avenue in the Bronx. That's easy. Hey, Chief, what do you want to eat? I said, get the van up to Arthur Avenue. Let's get the raviolis. That was my favorite. And some great cooks too, man.
You never go wrong with that.
Yeah,
never go wrong with that. Good plate of ravioli. Fourth, favorite bar, and some guys aren't drinkers, which is fine. If not bar, then restaurant in New York City.
I didn't have a favorite bar, but I used to take my father and my son to Frankie and Johnny's Pine Tavern in the Bronx. Really a top shelf place. We'd go to the Yankee game and we'd go to the Pine Tavern afterwards. Great food, great Italian American restaurant. Yeah, the Pine Tavern. There was a bar in the neighborhood. There used to be an Irish bar called Glackens. And it was over there that some of the guys would, before a party or something, they would go over and get Glackenized before the party. And so, but I didn't hang out in a bar, but my favorite restaurants was the Pine Tavern. Went there all the time. We used to have a Romeo luncheon there every year. Romeo, retired old men eating out. Do you know Reggie? Did you know Reggie Julius? You've heard of him, right?
I've heard of him. I never had him on the show though.
Oh, he's passed away. He was a World War II hero and everything. And he used to love going there. We'd go there for lunch, and he'd say, "Just give me the biggest ribeye you have on the menu." He was good, man. He was a great chief.
I've heard that name. That name is definitely floating around before between here and getting salty. And the last question of the rapid fire I'll give is: you spent so much of your career as a fire officer, I think 26 of the 35 years in different ranks, of course, but as a fire officer. So if you can grab someone that just got promoted to lieutenant and they're entering that stage in their career, based off your experiences, what advice would you give a brand spanking new fire officer, not just in the FDNY, but anywhere?
Well, the first thing I always told these guys is, you were promoted to serve your men not to be served by you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would tell them. Now that you're an officer, it's not you're not getting served by them. You have to serve them. You have to take care of them. You have to educate them. That's what I told them. That's my first piece of advice to new lieutenants, new captains, new chiefs when they came up to the division. You're promoted to serve your men, not to be served by them. That's one sterling piece of advice. I have a million of them, but that's the most important one.
Yeah, that's great advice, and it's good to remember. I remember Chief Jonas saying something similar. You work for the men; they don't work for you. You work for them,
That's
and
exactly right.
it goes a long way. And any fire officer that's worth his weight, and it applies. Listen, the police world too. If you're overseeing cops, same thing.
Anything.
Anything. Be good to your men and women, and they'll be good to you.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I remember another saying. General Rommel was a famous World War II general, very fantastic leader. He said, sweat defeats blood. Sweat gives. My mind is forgetting that. But it's a saying by Rommel. There's something like sweat. In other words, if you put in the sweat and you work hard, then you'll give life, and you just be tougher and better and smarter. And he had a great saying. It just right now I'm trying to think of it, but I'm not grasping it right now. General Rommel, famous general World War II. But like I said, some guys think they're lieutenants now. They think who they are, but you're a lieutenant, and you got to look after your men like baby chicks. You got to take care of them, train them, educate them, drill them, make them better firemen. Think of, and serve them. Don't let them serve you.
Amen.
Amen.
It's about as good as it gets, Chief. And listen, this was a show I wanted for a while, and it didn't disappoint. And I'm so glad that you came on.
I hope I was able to help a little.
You helped a lot. You didn't help a little. You helped a lot. And
thanks, Mike, for having me on. I really find it an honor. Like I said, there's a lot better guys out there than me, and smarter and legendary guys that could really, give us a good grasp of the job and educate us. And unfortunately, a lot of them are passing away now.
Yeah. Sadly, Tyson Moser put the saying in the chat. He says, "Sweat saves blood, blood saves lives, but brain saves both."
That's it.
Thanks, Tyson. Thank you, Tyson, very much. And thank you, Chief. As I said, stick around. We'll talk off air. I'm just going to say goodbye to the audience. And again, we did put the link to your foundation in the chat. It'll be put in the description. No problem. So for those of you that want to contribute, by all means, please do so. We want to thank everyone that tuned in tonight via YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Those of you who will listen to this on the audio side later on, and those of you who will watch the replay of this later on as well when you have the time to. Coming up next in the Mike the New Haven podcast, this should be an emotional show. On September 11th, 2001, Tom Langone was a police officer assigned to the NYPD Emergency Service Unit. He was in Truck 10 in Queens. And when the call came in for the first plane striking the Trade Center, Tom, with his unit, responded. He never came home. He was one of the 14 emergency service cops, 23 NYPD cops to perish that day. His daughter, Caitlin, who I've known for some time, will be coming on the show, and she will be looking back on the life and legacy of not only her dad as a police officer. He was in the FEMA team as well. He went to Oklahoma City as well, and Puerto Rico and other incidents abroad, but also his life as a father. He was a volunteer fireman out on the island. His brother, of course, was Pete Langone of Squad 252, who also gave his life that day. But we will look back on the life and legacy of police officer Tom Langone for a special edition of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit with someone that would know him best. And that was, like I said, and that is going to be his daughter, Caitlin. In the meantime, this has been Volume 59 of the Best, the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. And on behalf of producer Vick, who is not here tonight, but on vacation, so safe travels to him. And of course, Chief Joe DiBernardo, I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. And for those of you that will be listening on the audio side tonight, we're introducing the outro songs that we play on the audio side. It's going to be Rocket Man by Elton John. So enjoy. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.